Hey everybody, Plushie here, and with perhaps the fastest record of exiting NPC jail, Wandjina has joined our roster. She is an extremely adorable single-target boss-killing foreigner, and honestly I think she is a bit underrated by a lot of the people just because her event so far hasn't been the most interesting thing ever. However, that absolutely does not detract from the servant itself. So without further ado, let's get into today's hot take of Wandjina. So you might have noticed I never really start breaking down a servant by looking at their base stats because admittedly I'm not the most sensitive in terms of FGO numbers, especially MP gain. Like I can identify the outliers such as anything approaching 3.0 in terms of arts MP gain is really good and anything below 1.5 is pretty bad. However, anything in between is kind of hard to determine because it can drastically change depending on the servant's skill set or the servant's deck even sometimes, so I can't really give you a good analysis just by looking at the numbers, especially before we look at their skills. However, if anything is significant, I will bring it up for sure. And Wandjina has a really high attack stat. She has top 20 out of all SSR servants in terms of attack stats, which is pretty impressive and definitely contributes to her decent MP damage. She also has, in my opinion, the best deck for a quick DPS, having 2 quick cards, 2 buster cards, and only a single arts card. This gives her of the ability to do massive damage with her quick MP as well as crit very hard with her buster cards. Her MP gain isn't anything too amazing, kind of forget about it. If you want to loop with her MP without using a face cards, it's already a tall ask for quick servants unless you're Saber Medusa, but especially she's nothing too crazy for that. Anyways, let's get into her skills. Wandjina's first skill is a 20% quick and buster double buff. That is also a 2x 3-turn evade, and finally it gives her a 3-turn buff that allows her to apply a 5-turn status to herself whenever she attacks with her face cards, which means it doesn't include her MP, but it does include her extra attack. And this status raises her MP damage up by 10% per stack, and it caps at 10 stacks. So at max you can get her MP up to 100% extra damage, universally basically. Obviously it's not that easy to get, however it is fairly easy to get her MP damage up by 50% semi-permanently as well, because these statuses last for 5 turns and the skill is only a 6-turn cooldown. So it's really easy if you just select her cards as much as possible in a team, or especially if you're soloing, it's really easy. You can basically keep it permanently at above 50%, which is really good. This is what contributes to her very above average MP damage in a boss fight. Obviously it's not that easy to instantly trigger this. At max you can get 20% up if you just do card MP, and sometimes it doesn't happen because of RNG, but if you are just fighting a boss and you're expecting to spend a couple of more turns on it, you're going to get a lot of mileage out of this skill. This is also a really good survival skill with the 2x 3-turn evade only at a 6-turn cooldown, and you can use this whenever because the evade lasts for a whopping 3 turns. So I do recommend you use this skill as much as possible to try to rack up those statuses. So overall I think this is her bread and butter skill. You know, what makes her damage good, what makes her survival good, just really good skill in general. Her second skill is a 3-turn AoE 20% attack up as well as a 3-turn AoE 30% critical damage up. It also gives her man attribute allies a 3-turn 30% MP damage up, and finally it also gives her man attribute allies a 3-turn buff clock effect that allows them, whenever they get hit, to give all Wandjinas on the field the same status that she's able to apply with her first skill, which boosts her MP damage by 10%. All of this is on a 6-turn cooldown. So even if we just look at the base effects, AoE 20% attack up and AoE 30% critical damage up is a really good skill as a hybrid DPS. She also gives man attribute allies an additional 30% MP damage up for 3 turns, so it's really good. This is a really huge buff for any man attribute allies. The clock effect is a little bit awkward because honestly she doesn't have that many good supporters that are of the man attribute, so it's not that easy to take advantage of this extra, status boosting from getting hit. But at the same time, I do think it's usually enough just for her first skill to stack up those statuses. I don't think she really needs this. This is just a good bonus. Fun part about this as well is it's all Wandjinas on the field. So if you double the Wandjina, both of them will get the status instead of just the one that casts the skill. So you can actually double this up. The clock also stacks. So there are silly stuff you can do with like St. George and 2 Wandjinas, and you taunt St. George. So every time he gets hit, both Wandjinas gets 2 stacks of that status that boosts her MP damage. But usually it's not that worth building a team around, in my opinion. But overall, even without that clock effect, this is already a really good skill. This even gives her some utility in multi-core farming, because 20% attack up and 30% MP damage up both for 3 turns, it's a really good number. Wandjina's third skill is a self 30 MP battery, as well as an AoE 10 MP charge per turn for 5 turns, and an AoE 1000 heal per turn also for 5 turns, all on a 7-turn cooldown. So this is yet another super solid skill. The 30 MP battery helps when you want to finish the fight fast, either you want to nuke the boss or you want to use her for farming. The 10% MP slow charge can also help with multi-core farming. However, you are only able to take advantage of 2 of these effect procs, because on the 3rd turn only 2 of these will activate. However, with how good her buffs for man attribute allies are, this could still be worth it. And this effect is extremely good for longer boss fights. Quick traditionally lacks these kinds of sustain effects. You don't have a quick Merlin after all. Now 1000 per turn might not seem like a lot, but it is a 5-turn effect on a 7-turn cooldown, so there's only 2 turns worth of downtime, and it's a total of 5000 HP heal. So I feel like this gives a quick team a lot more sustain if you do want to run her as the main DPS. So overall, I enjoy this skill a lot. As for Wandjina's passives, she has Existence outside of the domain. Finally, a foreigner who has this passive again. With neither Nagnaria nor Kukulkan having this passive, I wasn't looking forward to her having it, but I'm really glad that she does, because this means that she can combo with Van Gogh, which is arguably one of the strongest pushing forces to prop up the entire foreigner class. Getting 100% extra crit boost whenever she MPs is just so strong. With her deck already being good for critting, she is a awesome crit damage dealer. She also has magic resistance A+, which gives her an innate 21% debuff resist. On top of the 8% that she gets from existence outside the domain, she has 29% passive magic resist, which is really high. I really appreciate, especially boss killers, to have this high of a magic resist, because over time they can block off a lot of very annoying debuffs. And finally, she has a brand new passive, Cradle of the Stars, that gives her 20% extra MP damage up when she's in the airspace battlefield. Now, the airspace battlefield was introduced with Summer Melusine, and if you remember when we talked about Summer Melusine, this is a very rare battlefield. It basically never happens, so this is unfortunately kind of a non-passive, but when it does happen, a whopping 20% MP damage up is absolutely massive, so you might want to bring her over some other options if you somehow do run into a airspace battlefield. And finally, Wandjina's MP is a 7-hit single target quick MP that gives her 1 turn of Invul Pierce as well as 50% extra damage against threat to humanity enemies, meaning that both of these effects also apply to the face cards after her MP on the same turn. This MP also deals extra damage depending on how many layers of Wrath of the Elemental statuses she has on herself. These are the same statuses I mentioned when talking about her skill 1 and skill 2 that last for 5 turns, as well as boost her MP by 10% every single layer, and it caps at 10 layers, meaning that she at max can deal 100% extra damage just from these statuses. And finally, her overcharge effect is a 1-turn MP damage up effect that happens before the MP that scales from 10% all the way up to 30%. So this is a very good MP, obviously. The Invul Pierce is once again super valuable, especially nowadays. There are so many unremovable invul/evade buffs on bosses that if you have this effect on your MP, that means you have complete freedom to run any CE you want and any support you want, and not having to bring a specific CE or support to deal with this gimmick. This MP also deals 50% extra damage against threat to humanity enemies, which is not that common in farming, but pretty common amongst bosses. foreigner bosses especially, and foreigners do double damage to other foreigners. While you have to be a little bit more careful if you want to use her against another foreigner because she does take double damage as well, she will be dishing out massive amounts of damage, especially considering this effect also extends to her face cards and how good of a crit damage dealer she is. And this MP gets an innate anti-trait depending on how many layers of this status you have on yourself, which is not that easy to trigger in farming. You would have to rely on card RNG. However, it is extremely easy to maintain like 5 layers or even more when you're fighting against a boss. So essentially she has universal anti-trait that isn't even depending on a debuff, which means that it just happens all the time. And finally, her overcharge effect is very underwhelming. It's a 1-turn non-ramp up effect that starts with an extremely small number at 10%. Honestly, I wouldn't really value this at all in terms of overcharge. I guess it's a neat little damage boost. Might as well give it to the anti-threat to humanity, in my opinion. So how do I feel about Wandjina? Well, in terms of farming, I know I did mention she has some potential in multi-core because of her big buff on man attribute allies, as well as her basically having an AoE 20 MP battery. However, I feel like her bigger problem is going to be her own MP damage. Now, is her MP damage bad by any means compared to other options when all of them are hitting neutral? No, not at all. It's actually above average, even if we don't consider the special trait damage that she can apply with her first skill. However, her problem more so lies in the fact that she is in the foreigner class, and her hitting anti-class is going to be rarer than other options, and usually she's going to be hitting neutral. Now, there are ways to mitigate her damage somewhat, because once again her first skill is able to apply a 5-turn lasting trait to boost her MP damage. You can just try to pick her cards as much as possible, even on waves when she is not going to attack with her MP. Depending on the card RNG, she can get all the way up to the full 50% extra damage on the final turn if you do plan to use her MP only on the 3rd turn. Her second problem is going to be her ability to use her MP multiple times. A lot of the times in multi-core farming, a single target really wants to use their MP more than once, and it is kind of difficult for her to do that because her base refund is not that good. She is not an arch servant to begin with either, and her battery is only a 30 MP charge, which is not big at all, even when we take into consideration the 20 extra MP slow charge that she will get in the following 2 turns. So overall, I think she has some potential, and especially depending on what she is fighting, she can be useful in farming. For example, if she's fighting against like another foreigner servant, most of them do have threat to humanity, so she's just going to shred them. Or maybe if you're fighting in an airfield and her 20% MP damage up passive does carry her damage enough, but in most cases I feel like she is definitely built more for challenge quests, and I would not expect her to perform very well in farming in general. In terms of challenge quest performance, Wandjina is surprisingly an offensive powerhouse, and a huge reason behind that is because of how good her universal anti-trait gimmick actually is. She gives herself a layer of Wrath of the Elemental status for 5 turns whenever she attacks with her face cards, and each of these gives her 10% extra MP damage. Because this is a self buff, this means that you can switch between different enemies and the damage will still ramp up, and this can even carry across different waves. And also, because this lasts 5 turns instead of 3 turns, it is a lot easier to get multiple stacks of this onto yourself, as opposed to something like Summer Kama's Burning Love, which is a debuff that only lasts for 3 turns. This gimmick is very similar to Super Bunyan's gimmick, it's just double the amount. And finally, the extra damage provided by these stacks are calculated separately to all other common buff types, as opposed to a power mod. So some people might not know that power mods are calculated as the same type of buffs as critical damage boosts as well as MP damage ups, so they are actually additive instead of multiplicative. And if you know about FGO buff stacking, if you have too many of these same type buffs that are additive, the more you add onto it, the more it waters down each individual effect. So having this effect not be able to be watered down by other type of buffs is really valuable in my opinion as well. So on top of having a really good and consistent MP damage boosting gimmick, she's also a really decent crit DPS, and it's not really because of her own skill set, but because of how good a vessel she is to pair with other good crit supports. So first and foremost, she has existence outside the domain passive, so she obviously pairs very well with Van Gogh. Her deck also helps with that because 2 quick cards, Van Gogh gives quick down on the enemy, and 2 buster cards because buster cards does the most damage and is the best for crit in general. This also means that she pairs really well with Summer Scotty. In my opinion, the best deck for a quick DPS right now is quick MP and then QQBBA, simply because you can crit very hard with Summer Scotty's 100% buster crit. So she has almost perfect synergy with both Summer Scotty and Van Gogh, and you get a super good crit DPS just because of how good she fits with 2 of the best crit supports in the game right now. And also the MP has Invo Pierce, so there is an additional layer to guarantee her damage landing on the enemy. And finally, the MP obviously also does anti-threat to humanity damage. I really don't think she needs that at all in order to do effective damage compared to some other neutral options. As long as this Wrath of the Elemental status goes beyond 3 stacks, which is extremely easy in a challenge quest, it's already out damaging most other neutral options. Now, compared to Berserker class servants, it's still not going to be as good, but as a universal single target DPS, I think she's already performing extremely well. But Wandjina isn't just able to do very good damage in a quick team, she's also able to provide your quick team with a decent amount of sustain. Now, it is just her skill 3 and it might not look like much at first, but do remember that these are 5-turn effects, especially considering quick teams usually lack these kinds of effects. Having a DPS being able to provide this for the team and not having to sacrifice a slot just to include another sustain engine is extremely valuable. Van Gogh also especially appreciates both of these effects because Van Gogh takes a lot of curse damage. It doesn't kill her, but it does take her down to very low, so having a passive heal is decent. And also, this passive MP generation helps Van Gogh spam her extremely broken MP just a little bit easier. So overall, I think Wandjina once again in this aspect does slightly outclass other single target quick DPSs just because she's able to help your team live a little bit better. This amount of sustain also allows Wandjina to solo pretty okay. I wouldn't say she's amazing at soloing, but she does also have the standard 2x 3-turn evade on a 6-turn cooldown, so she has at least some form of hard defense that is, semi-consistent, and you can kind of have it up pretty often. But the main attraction to her solo playstyle is how easy she's able to stack the Wrath of Elemental statuses on herself. When she's soloing, it's so easy to have like constantly 7 or even more stacks of that status on herself. So your MP damage just has a passive like 70% extra damage boost, which is absolutely insane. So overall, I think Wandjina, people don't really have to pull. Most DPS servants these days, people don't have to pull, and she isn't really a good farming DPS either. However, Wandjina performs very well in challenge quests. She is also able to provide your team with good sustain, even though I did emphasize how good she pairs with Van Gogh and Summer Scotty. I feel like she can benefit your team no matter what. She doesn't rely on any support to proc her MP damage boosting gimmick, and that skill 3 can help your entire team as well. So overall, really fun, really cool, and innovative boss killing DPS in my opinion. So anyways, hope you guys enjoyed the video. I know this is a bit messy. I really don't know what to say. I feel like I'm missing something. Maybe I didn't test enough with her, but I also don't want to drag this on for too long and release this like 2 days before the banner ends. And if you have any thoughts about Wandjina, please leave them in the comment section and we can have further discussion about it maybe. And if you do want to pull for this absolutely adorable servant, wish you the best of luck. And I'll see you guys in the next one.